Hi there, dear friends. Kalidas here to offer some astrological thoughts for the day. Just to start, I'd like to say, in case there's any sound breaks or interruptions in the quality of the sound of this video, you can always find these recordings afterwards on YouTube on my site, Astrology with Kalidas, and there's no spaces there. Just one word, Astrology with Kalidas. So today we're going to be talking about pride, prediction, and pitfalls. The many pitfalls that await those who approach life with pride in the ego. You could think of it like the ego is centered in the medulla oblongata. That's where the moon is centered, the fluctuating light. And when someone is very ego-centered, they tend to have a lot of weight and energy there in the medulla, and therefore their nose kind of goes up. And if you walk like that through life, you'll fall into every pitfall that's in front of you. And this is because we're not being cautious. So astrologers in India, there's a saying that astrologers are cursed. And this is likely because they often fall to pride about their right predictions. Why is the science of astrology able to predict correct happenings in the future? It's not the brilliance of the astrologer. It's that the science is brilliant. It's that the structure of the Jyotish, of the planets and the awareness of those and the way the chart's set up, no astrologer created that. That was created by people who learned how to go breathless into cosmic consciousness. And that's where the profundity of the science comes from. So just because an astrologer's learned the language of the sages, that's not a cause for pride. There should always be, and look for this in the astrologer that you connect with, because there should be a humility there and a reliance on the divine who does know. If they're using their knowledge of this language as their own profundity, as their own sense of brilliance, then that will grow pride, and astrologers are indeed cursed if they live in that way. Because you can make correct predictions, you can have insights, and it can be an amazing way to develop your intuition to study the planets from day to day. But what if you have a few right perceptions, and you begin to think that you're like an oracle of some type? Then when you have a wrong perception, which is going to happen, your moon's going to wax and wane. Your mind will sometimes not be in the highest frequency and will draw negative thinking. You'll believe that too. If you think that your thoughts and your mind and your consciousness is brilliant because of anything good that's happened through you, then you'll carry pride into the next adventures in life and won't be able to intuit the way through. It's said by Babaji that the quality most pleasing to God is humility. And upon reflecting on that, you might think that humility is pleasing most to God because God only wants to help us. And He can't help us when we're all proud and arrogant and think that we know the way without needing guidance from Divine Mother. So Yogananda said that pride is blinding, and it banishes our vision of the vast greatness of other souls. Every soul is great. And if an astrologer develops pride because of a few correct predictions or perceptions, they're basically stealing from the sages their profound consciousness that they created the science with and calling it their own. I'd call that theft. So pride is dangerous. To grow in pride from correct astrological calculating is very dangerous, and indeed you are cursed if you walk that way. They say pride comes before a fall, and when you fall, it hurts, and the higher you fall from, the harder it hurts. So keep that in mind if you're going to study the science of astrology. It comes from the sages. It comes from those who are breathless in ecstasy, and they can perceive the planetary energies effortlessly because they've become one with them. And an astrologer's job is just to learn their language, which they created for us to be able to have insight as we walk through our life journey. So prediction. This is based on where the moon was at the time of your birth. It sets you on a specific karmic timeline that is 120 years long. No, not everyone lives 120 years, but perhaps the science was developed during a time in which that was true. One of the theories, at least. But it's an 120-year cycle in which each of the planets gets to have a time of dominance. And that's what the science of prediction is based on, is that we can look in the chart, which the sages created with their superconscious attunement, and we can see they've laid it out for us. As long as we have the birth time, we can track the Mahadasha system. And the Mahadashas is the planetary influences that will occur throughout the life. That's what makes astrology predictable. And like you'll go through a big change in 3 years, that kind of thing is... there's other influences. One of them is when Saturn goes over the moon, and then you can also track the bigger planets and how they activate karma in the specific house of the individual. But what is prediction? Do we have the capacity to correctly, accurately predict? I would say no. In fact, it's quite a dangerous practice. Because what you're assuming when you make a prediction about someone's chart is that you know what they're going to do. You're assuming you know what their reactive process is going to respond like. And nobody knows that. We can't see the future because we don't know how people will respond to the events, the karmic events that come. So there was a very famous astrologer who came to America and began to give prediction astrological readings to many of the famous Hollywood stars. And lo and behold, a lot of it was correct. And Swami Kriyananda had a reading from him. And this very famous astrologer, they called him the astrologer to the stars because he worked with a lot of movie stars. And Swami Kriyananda had a reading with him. And he told Swami Kriyananda that he would have an amazing amount of wealth, world renown, and that he would live to be 96 or 95. And none of those things were true, at least not during Swamiji's life. Perhaps he will have world renown. I deeply believe so, that to be so in the future because of what he has given us. If you investigate the work of Swami Kriyananda, you'll find an endless wealth of spiritual wisdom, inspiration, and enlightenment. So it's true in a sense that he will become world-renowned. I believe that prediction is ultimately true. But this specific astrologer was reading a different system, meaning that the system, ever since Mr. Beautiful Sri Yukteswar astrologer came to our planet, he updated what was in need of updating in the sidereal zodiac. And previously, all of astrology was following what's called the Lahiri Ayanamsha, and that's just a 1 degree and 20-minute difference than the calculation of Sri Yukteswar, which is what I follow and my teacher follows. And Swamiji's chart is very different from the Sri Yukteswar perspective and calculation. And it majorly, in a major way, fits what actually happened in his life. So it's a good case study. But what I'm pointing out is even a very adept astrologer can be wrong about prediction. And why is that? Because we don't know how if the person's going to make a heroic effort to change their reactive process. It might be your karma to get fired, for instance, and the boss notices a mistake that you made, and he's fuming and comes into your office yelling at you, and you don't think maybe you think you didn't make the mistake, and so you, instead of listening to the boss, you yell back at him, and are very angry that he's wrongly accusing you, and therefore you get fired. Well, that could have been predicted, but what if you had said, "I'm sorry. I want to do the best that I can at this job, and please help me know how I can improve." That's kindness and receptivity, and that's a different reactive process to being accused than yelling back. And you see, one has just made their own chart unpredictable by changing their response to the karma. Because that boss is going to think highly of them after that, most likely. Wow, what a receptive, kind, and humble employee. Remember, humility, not pride. Humility is the quality most pleasing to God, because then He can help us the most. And when we hold pride, Yogananda says we are blinded, and it banishes our vision of the greatness of other souls. So when we use prediction, we have to keep this in mind, that the person is unpredictable. Their chart is actually unpredictable. And the only thing that would make it predictable is if they were doing the same thing they'd always done and made no effort to change themselves. And so it's kind of insulting to predict someone's future, because that's based on an assumption that you know what's going to happen to them due to their reactive process. But what if they change that? That will change their karma, and their horoscope can be transcended. It's called outwitting the stars. And it's learning to work through the karma as a student of life, rather than approaching our karma with arrogance as if we already know all the answers. That's a very frustrating and difficult way to live, I can tell you from personal experience. And humility is what opens us to intuition and grace and guidance. Jesus said, unless you become like a little child, you won't enter the kingdom of heaven. So imagine yourself as a child in the passenger seat of the car. Divine Mother is driving, and you can ask her all the questions you want about where she's taking you. And she will answer you through life circumstances, scenarios, and perhaps through your own intuition. What else did we want to talk about today? Yogananda speaks of the superiority complex is born of an inferiority complex. In other words, like, think of a little chihuahua. He's always so barky and loud and obnoxious and tries to look like big and vicious, but he's so tiny, people just laugh. And that's kind of what an inferiority complex and a superiority complex looks like. It's called little big man. It's like a complex, little big man complex. It's like we're not good enough in ourselves, in our ego, so we try to appear better than we really are, and it's a pretense, and it makes life hard to live that way. Wouldn't you rather be yourself? People will like you more if you're yourself than if you put on a pretense. So it's not easy to work through our karma, and one of the defense mechanisms is to affirm something like, I already know everything. I don't have anything to learn. If somebody thinks differently than me, then they must be wrong. They must be stupid. And that's the kind of troubled consciousness that develops from a prideful attitude in life. And you'll most certainly fall into the pitfalls that await you. Pride comes before a fall. And astrology is a dangerous practice if it's done with ego. But if it's done as a service to God, in tune with an enlightened master, it's a very different thing. And it can help people in their karmic journey on the way home back to God. It's a beautiful science and healing art that was given to us by enlightened beings, that any astrologer who's studied the science should give credit to those enlightened beings and to God who gave us this profound science. All that the astrologer did was learn how to read the language. So what is the solution? Humility, recognizing that even your heart beating is not the result of your power, that the mind frequency that you bring your own mind to through where you're centered in your spine, that has to do with the kind of thoughts you're drawing. And Yogananda said that the thoughts are universally rooted, not individually. Meaning if you have a brilliant thought, that's not your thought. That came from the cosmos and you attuned to it. So here at Ananda we have a very strong emphasis on the idea that God is the doer. And it frees you. It frees you when you do something good, which you will. If you pray that God flow through you in everything, you'll become brilliant at what you do. But if you take that into the ego, you'll lose it. So if we give the credit to God, and not just for the good things that we do, for the bad things too, because He made this world so hard. And it also frees us from guilt and ego focus when we've erred in some way. To lift it up to Divine Mother and say, God is the doer. You screwed up through me. Let's do better next time. Help me to attune better. And this is a way to grow in our devotion and our attunement. is by seeing God as the doer in everything that we do. I'd like to read now from the autobiography of a yogi. Yogananda says, "Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind, and with all thy strength. Christ has proclaimed this as the first commandment. The uplifting obligation to love God is assumed with man's first breath of an air freely bestowed by his only benefactor. The breath that's entering your lungs at this minute is being freely bestowed by your only benefactor. And it's an uplifting obligation that Christ gives us to love God." And where is God? You know, like, do we see him? The answer is yes. He's here right now, right in front of you. And God is in all humans, all nature, and all life. And so this world will test us in not looking like God. God comes in disguise as difficult people or difficult situations, and we so easily lose sight of that guiding power of divine love. But why is Christ saying, "Thou shalt love the Lord with all thy heart"? Is that a commandment? Or is it for our benefit? Is it that when we love God and others, we begin to transcend our karma? It's for our benefit that Christ is giving us this so-called commandment. It's not a rule. It's not something that says you're going to get in trouble if you don't do this, though that is true from perspective. But when we love God in all creation, he can help us the most. And we won't get in as much trouble because we'll be loving and kind to everyone instead of see them as separate from ourselves and sometimes even in competition with us. So I have one more reading for today, and this one comes from Sister Gyanamata. And she was one of Yogananda's great disciples who achieved complete freedom in this life. And she says, "If I could engrave upon the heart of the disciple 2 basic truths, this is what they would be. First, you can have only your own, and your own will surely come to you. Indeed, you cannot avoid it. Second, the Guru is always the Guru in every act and utterance, even when he is not consciously acting as such. And you could include that in all your interactions in this world. The Guru is always the Guru, even when he's not consciously acting as such. And that means your very circumstances, the very people in your life, and the struggles that you behold, that's the Guru." And then she finishes by saying, "In our hearts, perhaps subconsciously, we really prefer what our karma gives us to that which another receives, knowing that it is what we need. For the disciple to permit the thought that he is being unfairly treated to enter his mind is fatal. And if we have grown in pride and we live in pride, then when things happen to us that we don't like, we're going to think we're being unfairly treated. Or if we have a negative perspective on something happening to us and we have pride, we'll think that we're right in our negative perception. If we have humility, then we'll feel the negative perception. We'll say there's something off about that. Even if I'm factually right, I'm energetically wrong. And that's what Swami Kriyananda says. Even if you're factually right, energetically you will do wrong if you act by negative emotion as your guide. So Sister Gyanamata says, for the disciple to permit the thought that he's being unfairly treated to enter his mind is fatal. The will of God flows to the disciple through the Guru at all times. If we accept our discipline in the right spirit, it will strengthen our character as nothing else could. And this is what we've come for, is to offer ourselves up again, not affirm our separation anymore, but to offer ourselves up for unification with the divine and say, use me as your instrument in this world. Help me to feel your energy flowing through me in all my endeavors, my activities, my engagements with people. And this is really the way to get free from pride and from the pitfalls of the path. To develop humility, to develop devotion, and to serve and love God in all. Those are the secrets to the path. And if an astrologer is also a yogi, then they should be very cautious about the kind of information that they offer to others, that it always feel, and that they pray first for guidance, and that it always feel like it's not actually coming from me as some great astrologer, but it's coming through me. And we're using a science that came through the great sages of ancient India. And it's actually God is the doer. And to recognize that God is the doer is really, that's the pathway out. Swami Kriyananda said that if you're close to enlightenment and you begin to go into these higher states, then eventually you have to perform this purification task of going into all your past lives and remembering and seeing them all as God. That God was always there, that there was nothing separate from Him. There was no individual self. Your very heart and breath happen by the grace of God. Your consciousness flows from Him. And this is the sun. The sun is in your spiritual eye. The moon is obligated to perform a dualistic task. It waxes for 2 weeks and then it wanes for 2 weeks. And the waxing is like us in our progressional cycle through life when things are going well. Thumbs up, life is good. And then the waning part is when life's hard and we're wanting out and we want an escape, and sometimes we make bad decisions because we're kind of in darkness of negative emotion. So what do you want? Do you want to live that way in duality for the rest of your life? Because that's what you will live in if you live for the ego. And it's and it being the God. As Yogananda says in one of his prayers, I will ignore that tiny, boasting masquerader impersonating thee. And that's our ego. It likes to pretend that it knows everything, and it falls very easily when it does so, because life is hard, and God will throw you a curveball. If you think that you have it all figured out, be prepared for a real screwball, because life is humbling, and that's the secret, is to recognize we actually can't make it. We're not going to make it today without God. We won't make it to the end. And maybe we will physically, but we won't be happy without that guidance, without that grace flowing through us, and without kindness and love for others, we won't be happy. So pride, that's what grows when we think we know a lot. The way to remove it is to recognize how much we still don't know, and that we're a student. And if you're in this world, you're a student. You're learning a lot, and there's much more to go. So if we look at the teacher, Divine Mother, in everything, and try to cultivate, as Yogananda recommended, its spiritual X-ray vision, so that we can see through the ordinary appearance and intuit the presence of God and therein, in whatever circumstance or person that we're with. It makes life a lot more fun and enjoyable to perceive the divine. And then predictions. We can't predict any charts, we can't predict anything, because we don't know that the individual won't make heroic effort to change their reactive process and thus begin to transcend their karma. I've seen people's charts with really difficult positions in the 8th house of death, which looked like they were going to have a real horror story. But you know what? Instead, they focused their life on helping those type of people. They formed halfway houses to bring drug addicts in. They helped people who'd just been released from prison to get back on their feet. And they helped those who had these very difficult circumstances. And it was a great teaching to me to read that person's chart, because she was an angel and she had very difficult karma. And what did she do? She said, I'm going to focus my life on serving those with very difficult karma. So if you want to get freed from your karma, focus on service. What's best for all? How can I serve? How can I be an instrument? And if you don't know, pray for guidance. That's perfectly normal to not know what to do. That's a human thing. And for just to bring in the energy of Rahu, Rahu is the part of the mind that tries just obsessively to perceive the future and to secure it. And that can never happen. We can't secure the future, and we can't perceive it. Maybe there's psychic powers that people can have, but it's up to your free will to change your reactive process to your karma. Who can predict whether you're going to do that or not? That's not in the chart. This lady who had helped so many people, she could have easily been a drug addict herself, which was certainly true in the beginning of her life. But you see how she transcended her karma by focusing on service to others in that way. So Rahu is what astrologers are using, in fact, when they try to give you a prediction about your future. They're using a very unstable energy of the mind. God did not give humans the power to perceive the future perfectly. And so if we're trying to do that, we're going towards Rahu. It's unstable. So how do we work with a chart then? If somebody wants to know what's coming up, we work with it energetically. You study the energy of the planets. What kind of energy might shift? But don't give specifics. That's at least my style. I don't like to give specifics. Yogananda himself would not give specifics. When people would come to him and say, "What should I do, Master? I have this problem, that problem, and the next one all in my way, and I don't know how to figure them out. What should I do?" And Yogananda would say, "Put your mind here. Do your best and give it to God." And those are the 3 steps that he recommended. He did not give specifics. Why is that so? Because he wanted the disciples to grow in their own attunement, not to rely on somebody external to themselves to tell them what to do. And so an astrologer is not meant to tell you what to do or to give you specific steps you should take in your future, unless they are to help raise your energy. Because then when you raise your energy, you'll perceive your challenge differently and you'll attune to that higher vibration and you will go through your karma. And thus you'll have learned something about attunement, about prayer. And that's what life is about, is learning about this process of attuning back into unity with God. So beware of pride, because it will bring a lot of pain. And if you feel that energy in you, a seed of pride, of arrogance, then pray that God remove it somehow, because it will keep you bound. When you want to meditate and go deep, you won't be able to let go of the ego. When you someday reach that part where you're going to go breathless, of your spiritual progress, where you begin to go breathless, you'll be too concerned for the ego, so you won't be able to do it. So in other words, it's attachment to ego that makes us suffer. And if we look at our chart like a student who's meant to learn lessons, there'll be way less egoic approach to our tests and challenges. There'll be much more receptivity. Divine Mother, what are you trying to teach me today? That kind of attitude. Or Divine Mother, use me today as your instrument to do good in the world. No matter what karma comes up, help me to be spreading your light and your love. So recognizing that God's power alone can free us is really the secret to humility. Swamiji called it self-forgetfulness. Just offering up the self and recognizing only God everywhere. He's omnipresent. As the autobiography of a yogi says, that the yogi learns to cultivate this love for God and all. And it's a love solitary because omnipresent. It means that we're not just loving many different people and choosing who we love and who we don't. We're learning to love God in all. And that's why Jesus said, love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, mind, soul, and strength. Is if you do that, you'll get a lot of help. You'll create really good karma, and you'll become one with God again. So remember, those commandments are for our benefit, and in humbly following them, we expand and become closer to true happiness in God. So thanks for tuning in today. It was my pleasure to share. And again, if there's sound breaks or any interruptions in this video, you can find the unflawed recording on the YouTube page, Astrology with Kalidas. So many blessings to you, and thank you for joining me today. Bye-bye.